If you don't know me, you might not realize I'm a big fan of horror. I love tension, I love suspense, but I don't really have t-shirts with horror movies on them or movie posters or anything like that. Theo's probably the scariest thing I have, isn't that right, Theo? Some friends just don't understand hedgehogs, I think. But in any case, I've done a lot of research, and you can see that in this playlist over here that I've done of game design for horror games, as well as some writing tips for horror writers.
Hey, Rodeo Randy is currently on sale at Storyteller's Vault. Link up above and down below.
This is advice I've built up over 10 years of playing horror-based role-playing games, and I hope it can help you become a horror game master. Designing a horror one-shot or campaign really needs to be focused in on investigation. Combat and social encounters are just as good as well, but they aren't as important as the investigation aspect. Your players are trying to figure out what's going on, there's a mystery, there's tension, they don't know what they're facing. These are elements that you want to incorporate into your horror games. Even if you're playing D&D, you don't want your players just to waltz over to the Vampire Lord's house in the middle of day and stake him through the heart. That's not horror, that's a very pragmatic way of killing a vampire. What you need is to add tension. You need the vampire to have kidnapped someone and is going to kill them at midnight. This way the players are fighting on the vampire's turf and they don't have a choice of just waiting. Or if they do, that vampire now has a servant that is going to protect them. The systems I recommend for doing a horror-based RPG are Call of Cthulhu, Chronicles of Darkness, and Dread, which is that Jenga tower game that everyone talks about around this time. I really wouldn't recommend things like Dungeons & Dragons or Pathfinder because they're more focused on combat, and other narrative-based games like Fate and Powered by the Apocalypse don't really hit horror for me, but that your mileage may vary. One of my favorite tips to go to is that of the unknown horror. So let's say you have a room with a dead body in it. You have all these questions. What killed the person? Is it still around? But if you have a dead body in a room with a grizzly bear, your questions are going to be a lot less. The French film director Jacques Tourneur of Curse of the Demon decided that he wanted to create a psychological horror film about whether or not a monster existed or it was all in the people's imagination. He filmed a lot of this movie with that assumption, but when the producers saw it, they wanted to bank on the universal monster trend of having an iconic monster to sell toys of and movie posters and all that. As you can see, the tension's sort of lost here when they show the monster. You don't have this wonder of what it could be or if the monster even exists. Instead, you see this goofy hand puppet. So how can we apply this unknown horror into our tabletop role-playing game design? Well, first off, when you start describing the monster, you can use more general terms. You can describe how its eyes look, the emotions it's conveying, the blood dripping from its claws and things of that nature. You don't have to say, oh, you see a vampire. Instead, you see a pale figure with blood dripping from its mouth and the eyes of darkness pointed right at you. And that's a lot more evocative than just saying, there's a vampire. This goes into my second point, which is, for the love of God, please don't name your monsters! If your players see a name, they can either determine what the monster's weaknesses are, so if you say, oh, it's a vampire, they immediately know, oh, it's a vampire, we need to get it into sunlight, set it on fire, or stake it through the heart, or any of those other things. Or if you name your monster, it gives the players something to use, something to anchor themselves to say, okay, we know that this creature is the Harbinger. We have the name, the Harbinger. We are going to use it. It gives it solidity. It lets your players at least know something about the creature. The Harbinger was a creature I created a few years ago for my Call of Cthulhu game. It had no attachment to any sort of mythical creature, and my players didn't know that name until the session that they found it. And they knew that the creature existed because they had seen what it was capable of before in the previous sessions as they were trying to track it down. Knowing what something is capable of before knowing its name adds a lot more tension because this is an unknown creature that you have never encountered before. Whereas if I say, oh, it was a wolf attack, you immediately go, oh, maybe it was a werewolf. This goes into my third point though, which is your players need to know something at some point, which means you need to telegraph the abilities and weaknesses of the creature. My favorite way of doing this is to have NPCs killed by the creature before, maybe even just some animals. One of my favorite go-tos was having cows being killed in the farm fields for the Harbinger, and that way my players could see what it was capable of when they went up against it next session. The one thing they didn't know was that the Harbinger was weak to water, and they could have found this out in any number of ways, but what ended up happening was they burned the docks that the Harbinger was standing on, causing it to fall into the water. Now, from their perspective, the Harbinger could still be alive out there killing, but they never heard from it again, whereas behind the scenes, the creature had died unceremoniously. This added a lot more to the game. I don't think the players really felt left out for having not done the killing blow because they think they might have killed it, but they're not sure. It's still out there in their mind, and it could be if I wanted to bring it back again. There are some things that you shouldn't do for horror games. Number one, don't target your players' real-life phobias to get entertainment. If a player's afraid of spiders, they might just leave your table immediately. Get their consent first, and if they don't consent to it, don't use it. Don't take away your player's agency. In horror movies, you might think the characters have nowhere to hide, nowhere to go, but they do have access to the environment around them. They can do things, they can interact with the creature. These are all things that you should allow your players to do so that they have agency, so that they feel like their actions matter. Along with player agency, don't make the monster invincible and unable to be defeated. Sure, you might not want it to die, but that doesn't mean it can't be defeated or scared away or imprisoned in some fashion. This is a game. The players need to have a win scenario even if it's not the best solution. Don't rely on grotesque imagery to get across the horror. You can do a lot with just normal basic words that can add to the creepiness factor without going X or NC-17 rated. Let me take one scene from How I Met Your Mother to show you what you shouldn't do for your players. Also, do not show your monster to your players unless you want it to die, because that can and will happen if you're not careful, especially if you show it to them really early on, being like, oh, I'll just give it a little hint, like it's running around the corner, and well, now they're going to chase it, and they're going to try and get it into combat, and they're going to kill it. This happened to me when I was playing Through the Breach. As a player, I found out that fire was really good at killing the Carver, and me and another player were building fire on top of this character so much that it died almost instantly. And when we went into the next encounter, it was back somehow, and we were just like, okay, we'll just kill it again. And we did, and then it came back a third time, and it just sort of became this slog. It wasn't scary. We knew how to deal with it now. A key aspect to also keep in mind is pacing. You need to know how to build tension and suspense for your players, and you can find out more about that in this video over here. Thank you so much. Shout out to our patrons for supporting the channel.